Welcome. I am thrilled to welcome you all to my very first YouTube poetry session, Passport to Poetry, making poetry accessible to students and teachers alike worldwide. The content of the course provides an overview of key poetic works and major literary trends from the 16th century up to the present. We will also focus on central items of figures of speech and versification. The aim, by the end of this course, you will hopefully have gained enough familiarity with a wide range of poems, literary movements, and genres of poetry from the 16th century until today. Sharpened your ability to recognize and name important figures of speech and features of versification, and be able to consider these aspects in your analysis of poetry, particularly in the relationship between form and content. This is taken from an undergraduate course that I have taught a few times. I've adapted it for YouTube, but I hope it will be interactive as well. But that depends on you, dear viewer. Have a look in the video description to see all the other things that I plan to do in the future. Stay tuned for all that I have in store. I plan to publish at least once a month. As you can see, I'm starting with Blake from the 18th century, even though the course syllabus says that we will cover from the 16th century onward. And why is that? I just decided that language-wise, it's considerably more accessible in that it's much more similar to modern day English. So this should help us ease into the topic of poetry. What is a poem after all? According to the Oxford English Dictionary, it is a literary composition that is given intensity by particular attention to diction. It comes from the Greek word poema, which means to create, to compose a masterpiece. It's not strictly related to written or spoken creations, but also involves visual or musical masterpieces as well. Other associations that come to mind are that sometimes poetry is short, catchy, and concise in comparison to a long novel, for example. Poems also give us a chance to think, contemplate, and muse. It's not mere information. It forces us to stop, to slow down. Who writes poetry after all? Sometimes they are representatives of their age, sometimes they are nonconformists of their age. They're a type of word artist, observer, visionary, sometimes respected, sometimes rejected, but rarely entirely ignored, at least not after their death. How is this relevant to you? It gives you a chance to find out about different historical time periods, political backgrounds, indicated not just by different content, but by different modes of expression, such as rhyme, sound, meter, rhythm, syntax, and form, which are all aspects of versification. It's also fun to deal with dual, multiple meaning via puns, metaphor, imagery, and universal and important themes always come up. It's important to remember poetry is also interdisciplinary. It overlaps with theology, sociology, philosophy, psychology, music, visual art, entertainment. It's affected by scientific discoveries and so on. It also forces us to consider how is the way we address someone affected by who we are addressing. There's an overlap with marketing, with social skills, human resources, teaching. It also often makes people curious to experiment themselves and pass on their interest and fun to others. A poet is also the moral conscience of his or her society. Often they are full of hope in humanity. They provide a voice or a compass during strange and uncertain times. They are considered practical and realistic thinkers in a very violent and brutal world, considered a man or a woman of the world, and often are instructors, advisors, and entertainers. Of course, they might not be all of the above. Relevance to us is again, poetry involves a wide range of human emotions and subjective experiences, provides some insight on the human condition, the place of human beings in the grand scheme of things, and the chance to consider attributes and virtues such as contentment, gratitude, benevolence. All of these quotes are taken from Abrams, which I have quoted at the end of this entire presentation. Now, for today, there are a number of figures of speech that are important for us to consider. The terms on the left are the most important for today, but I suggest you look into all of the terms listed. Later on in the course, I'll explain rhyme and sound a bit more, meter and rhythm, as well as syntax and form. Today, we will mainly consider metaphors and biblical allusion from this list before you, as well as meter and rhyme. This might be a good moment if you want to pause the slides and look up some of the terms. So, as I've told you, we are starting with William Blake. He was born in 1757, lived till 1827, and is considered a romantic. What do I mean by that? We'll get into that very shortly. Romanticism in general. Yes. Okay, so after the American and French Revolution and the defeat of Napoleon, there was a great change in England. They changed from a mainly agricultural nation to an industrial nation. And this created a lot of nostalgia, which comes out in literature in different ways. The role of the poet at that time was to express, utter, and exhibit emotion and imagination. Spontaneity and freedom are important aspects of their lives. The natural setting is symbolic many times. They glorify the commonplace, they touch the supernatural, and individualism and nonconformity become more and more important. Of course, Wordsworth was a contemporary of Blake in the Romantic movement. He was born in 1770, lived till 1850, so many of their works overlap. We will touch on Wordsworth later in this course. The biographical background of Blake is relatively simple. He had an art education. He was an engraver and printer, and a number of the engravings coming up shortly are copies of the engravings that he made to match the poems, which he painted afterwards. He was famous post mortem. Very little attention was given to him in his lifetime, either as artist or poet. He was a supporter of the French Revolution and an abolitionist against slave trade, against child labor, which were big issues at that time, as you can see in the chimney sweeper poems, especially. He held an unorthodox worldview, although he was Protestant and biblical themes come up in his poetry. Creation, the fall, redemption, promise of recovery of Eden and the New Jerusalem. He is a mixed bag of Christianity and mythology. According to him, the fall in this myth is not the fall from humanity away from God, but a falling apart of primal people, a fall into division. And his goal is the restoration of universal brotherhood to unity by an improvement of sensual enjoyment, which is very romantic. Ironist, he comments on his society symbolically. Yes. Let's first talk about songs of innocence. Unlike some of his Christian compatriots, he rejects the notion of original sin. He believes children are born in innocence. He has an optimistic, positive worldview in this anthology of poetry called Songs of Innocence. He believes there can be injustice, evil, and suffering in this realm too, but the state of the child is innocent. It's idyllic, Eden-like. There's a natural, rural, which is a country setting. Songs of Experience is the contrary state of the soul. He sees this as ugly and terrifying. War, disease, poverty, social repression in the urban city setting come up. So he believes that children become corrupted over time. He sees this as a very pessimistic, skeptical worldview in Songs of Experience. So he also put them together and produced only 28 copies of both anthologies that were put together, which show the two contrary states of the human soul with twin poems. So today we're going to talk about two sets of twin poems that are very famous. So these poems, the first two that we're going to look at are the Tyger and the Lamb. Which one do you think belongs to Songs of Innocence and which one to Songs of Experience? If you guessed that the Lamb should belong to Songs of Innocence and the Tyger to Songs of Experience, you are correct. Now I'd like to read the Lamb aloud to you before we get into the analysis. Little Lamb, who made thee? Dost thou know who made thee? Gave thee life and bid thee feed by the stream and o'er the mead? Gave thee clothing of delight, softest clothing, woolly, bright. Gave thee such a tender voice, making all the vales rejoice. Little Lamb, who made thee? Dost thou know who made thee? Little Lamb, I'll tell thee. Little Lamb, I'll tell thee. He is called by thy name, for he calls himself a lamb. He is meek and he is mild. He became a little child. I a child, and thou a lamb. We were called by his name. Little lamb, God bless thee. Little lamb, God bless thee. So how does Blake use figurative language to link the lamb to his poetry anthology entitled Songs of Innocence? What are the biblical allusions we need to know in order to understand the message? And how is this underscored by its rhyme, sound, meter, and rhythm? The title of the poem is the best place to start. What associations come up in your head when you think of a lamb? What kind of an animal is a lamb? It's a quiet, submissive, soft, sweet animal. Compare a kitten to a spider or a wolf. The word lamb is capitalized, so we can assume that the writer is not merely addressing one particular lamb, but using a lamb as a metaphor, perhaps for a person with similar characteristics. The natural pastoral setting is also something we notice immediately, and due to the awareness of romanticism, perhaps. Lambs don't usually live in cities, so this is the proper setting for a lamb. Line 4, which is marked in yellow, mentions by the stream and or the mead, which is just an old-fashioned word for meadow. Line 8 mentions vales, which are valleys. This was very commonplace, simple language at the time of writing. This rural setting is a metaphor for a pleasant worldview, reinforced by phrases like clothing of delight in line 5 and adjectives like softest, woolly, bright, and tender in lines 6 to 7, just to name a few. These are marked in green. In the second stanza, the writer forces us to push the lamb metaphor further by answering the question, "Who made thee?" from lines 1 and 2 with "I'll tell thee" in lines 11 to 12. The metaphorical biblical allusion is made to Christ as the lamb in lines 13 to 15, which I've marked in red. According to the New Testament of the Bible, the Lamb of God died to redeem people from sins. He was innocent, offered no resistance, and was gentle, pure, and simple. In the Old Testament, lambs were offered as a sacrifice. In lines 15 to 16, the writer then creates a metaphorical link to himself and the reader as human children to the Lamb. If they bear the name of the Lamb, he must represent them also. By extension, a lamb is metaphorical for all the positive things represented by Christ: goodness, peace, harmony, unity, trust, and yes, of course, innocence. Coupled with a pleasant pastoral setting, it is a perfect world. The rhyme, which I've also indicated on the right-hand column, is AA, BB, CC, and so on. The rhythm is found not just at the end of the line, but throughout. What strikes me here is that the end rhyme is sometimes stressed, masculine, and sometimes unstressed, feminine, at the end. This makes it quite pleasant and varied to listen to. The sound. There are many soothing vowel sounds and consonant sounds. For example, the repetition of "who made thee" in lines 1 and 2, and the repetition of "clothing" in lines 5 and 6 are soothing sounds. The meter is also very pleasant. There are 3 iambs at least, which is the most common meter in poetry. This is very pleasant and gives a comfortable pace, which is common in natural human speech as an element to the poem. So the form supports the content. Let's move on to the Tyger. Tyger, Tyger, burning bright in the forests of the night, what immortal hand or eye could frame thy fearful symmetry? In what distant deeps or skies burnt the fire of thine eyes? On what wings did he aspire? What the hand dare seize the fire? And what shoulder and what art could twist the sinews of thy heart? And when thy heart began to beat, what dread hand and what dread feet? What the hammer? What the chain? In what furnace was thy brain? What the anvil? What dread grasp dare its deadly terrors clasp? When the stars threw down their spears and watered heaven with their tears, did he smile his work to see? Did he who made the Lamb make thee? Tyger, Tyger, burning bright in the forests of the night, what immortal hand or eye dare frame thy fearful symmetry? How does Blake use figurative language to link the Tyger to his poetry anthology entitled Songs of Experience? What are the biblical allusions we need to know in order to understand the message? How is this underscored by its rhyme, sound, meter, and rhythm? The Tyger poem is admittedly a little harder to unpack, but again, the title of the poem is the best place to start. A tiger draws up all kinds of metaphorical associations. We think of how ferocious, dangerous, threatening, and perhaps brutal and evil a tiger is. This is no pussycat. At the same time, there is a powerful, majestic element that is not entirely negative, demanding a kind of awestruck respect. In the very first line, the writer forces us to push the tiger metaphor further by making the tiger and fire synonymous. For only a fire can burn bright. Again, a fire has similar characteristics to the tiger, unpredictable, potentially destructive, but simultaneously a symbol of energy, intensity, and vitality. The negative aspects, however, of this tiger fire are reinforced by words like fearful symmetry in lines 4 and 24, which you see in green, the fact that dare is used in lines 7, 8, 16, and 24, by the word dread in lines 12 and 15, and so on. Quite advanced, sophisticated language is used. Forests is the setting, which, although rural, is not a pleasant place, but ablaze with fire in the dark, as we see in lines 1 and 2. And the negativity is reinforced by the adjectives and verbs, and so on, that I already mentioned above. In the fourth stanza, there is a change to an industrial setting, which expresses perhaps Blake's disillusionment with and anxiety related to industrialization. Unlike the Lamb poem, in which the one question concerning the Creator is resolved, there are at least 13 Creator-related questions in this poem that are never resolved. Have a look at all the question marks. We are also reminded to look at the poem concerning the Lamb in the second to last question. Did he who make the Lamb make thee? The biblical allusions are present here, but not as strongly as in the other poem. I'm sure that a tiger rather than a lion was chosen for this poem because Christ is also referred to as a lion in the Bible. Of course, fire in the Bible can also be something used for judgment, but in a positive sense, the Spirit is also depicted as fire. There are also allusions to Greek mythology. For example, there is a clear reference to Icarus, Daedalus, in stanza 2 when he writes of distant deeps and skies, suggesting the Creator flew too high while forging the creature. Prometheus is alluded to in line 4 of stanza 2, which says, "What the hand dare seize the fire?" This refers to the Titan who stole fire from the gods for humanity, representing the daring, transgressive nature of the tiger's creator. Now I'd like to touch on the elements of versification. Rhyme. It mostly ends on the masculine rhyme, which you see on the right of the first stanza there, except the word symmetry. So this has a very strong, harsh effect. In terms of sound, burning bright in line 1 and distant deeps are nice alliterations which add emphasis. This creates strength or impact to underscore the content. The meter is faster than the other poem with shorter line and a shorter verse. Finally, the rhythm is a mixture of regular and kind of set rhythms mixed with some irregular, jarring, and disturbing accents, just like the message. In conclusion, I would just like to say that although we're just scratching the surface with this preliminary analysis, I think you can see how interesting and rewarding it is to not only compare the twin poems and to look into the figures of speech, but to compare those elements with the elements of versification as well. This leads to a very rich analysis. Yes. Okay. Finally, we come to another set of twin poems. This first one is the poor but lovely Chimney Sweeper, the chimney sweeper that belongs to the anthology Songs of Innocence. And this is the artistic representation that Blake produced. with his own poem. This is the actual poem, which you can take time to read on your own. And this is part of the poem, also called The Chimney Sweeper, that was created by Blake and represented artistically. And here is the poem for you to read on your own. So now it's up to you. I'd like to give you a take-home question. How does Blake use figurative language to link the two different versions of the chimney sweeper to songs of innocence and songs of experience? What are the biblical allusions we need to know in order to understand the message? And how is this underscored by its rhyme, sound, meter, and rhythm? Please give me some feedback about the different metaphors, allusions, and other aspects of versification in the comments, or feel free to email me. Thank you very much, and see you next time.